Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Arthritis Action Podcast. I'm Mark, as always, your host, and today we have a little bit of a different type of episode. As I know this is a topic that many of our listeners have a keen interest in, which is gardening and arthritis. So, for this episode, I'm joined by Mark Emery from Thrive. So, Thrive, in case you don't know, is an organization that helps people and other organizations use social and therapeutic horticulture to help others, focusing on the management, design, and delivery of therapeutic gardens and programs. So Mark is a member of the training and education team, and he's kindly joined us to talk to us about gardening and how it can be beneficial for arthritis. So, hello, Mark. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Mark. Nice to be here.
Thank you. It's a very Mark-heavy episode, this one today, isn't it?
It is.
Both of us
With a
people.
C, I'm with a K, but that doesn't help.
Yeah, they can't see the letters, I
No.
suppose. Cool. So, as always, I've given like a really brief introduction of you, as I do for all the guests. But I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more and tell us a bit more about yourself and your work with Thrive.
Yes, certainly. I think, so my way into working at Thrive was initially I went to art college. I then worked with an animation studio in London. I lost my job there. I was looking for work, and a friend of mine sort of recommended I come and do maintenance gardening with him in sort of estates in central London. So I was doing that over the summer. I was working there for 3 weeks when the person who ran the maintenance firm came up and asked me if I was a gardener. I looked down at the steel toe cap boots I was wearing, the gloves on my hands, and the wheelbarrow next to me full of leaves, and I said, yes. The reason I sometimes tell this anecdote is that when working at Thrive, when people came in, trying to be people not as clients, but rather gardeners. These were people who were coming on board to sort of look after the green environment around them. And that was something sort of, I really tried to keep in mind. I did some volunteering with Samaritans. I got my RHS level 2, and then I volunteered with Thrive at Battersea, where I worked with people with learning disabilities, mental health needs, but also worked in sort of residential homes and outreach programs in special needs schools and such like that. And over that time, sort of learned quite a lot about working with people with a range of disabilities, thinking about adaptations. I've been in the training team now for sort of 4 years. And again, the nice thing is still learning. So still sort of running courses, but also listening to feedback, listening to what other people, other issues they have, or how they sort of overcome issues within the garden screen spaces they work in.
Amazing. It's amazing. It's quite interesting to think how much more there is to gardening than what people could perhaps think about, because there's organizations like yourself that do all this sort of different stuff as well.
Yeah, I think it is. So often people who garden sort of instantly sort of get this sense of the benefits that it provides, and this sort of sense of being outdoors, working in amongst nature, sort of tending to things, and sometimes just sort of very small things like perhaps working with people who maybe have a need to be looked after themselves, having the opportunity to sort of grow a bean seed, look after it, nurture it, and sort of that can be quite a powerful message. And so these metaphors we see within outdoor spaces, or just appreciating seasonal change, can be huge, but also that sort of physical activity, which for some people sort of helps them work out maybe sort of frustration or anger, but also that sort of sense of creativity in what sort of just simply planting a tulip bulb can provide.
Amazing. I mean that kind of leads me on to what my first question was going to be, is what are the benefits of gardening when you have arthritis?
I think perhaps we'd sort of look for maybe sort of the 3 main benefits we'd hope to achieve. Sort of one of them I covered a bit is that sort of contact with nature, sort of being outside, seeing sort of nature around us, sort of putting up bird feeders, watching squirrels around the garden, seeing sort of the colours we get in autumn, but also sort of appreciating the sort of dormancy of winter, and maybe sometimes connecting that to our own lives and how we maybe during the colder climate times of the year sort of are more inclined to sort of stay indoors as well. We've also got that sort of physical benefit, which can be sort of working on manual dexterity, so seed sowing, tabletop gardening and stuff like that. Maybe even just sort of walking around the garden gently to yourself, but also there's sort of other more large jobs of cutting things back and really getting stuck in. But also I think the other benefit as well is that sort of sense of teamworking and that social benefit as well. Having those discussions, sharing plants, the knowledge that sort of eating potatoes that you've dug up that day and eaten for dinner are going to taste better than any other potatoes you're going to try for a while. And that sort of joining in with communities, sharing ideas, and generally gardeners are a pretty genial bunch, aren't they? Mm. They are there to support, to help, and they're always happy to sort of share information and pass on knowledge to others. So those, I think, would be the three main things to look out for.
Absolutely. And I always think that gardening's quite an underrated, or maybe not like an unsung sort of hero in like when it comes to exercise, because it's a very physical thing to do, but very scalable as well, depending on what your abilities are.
Yeah, I think you're right. You can sort of look at it from a broad range of levels, can't you? As I said, we can sort of dig over a flower bed. We can sort of look at what we've done to get that sense of achievement and how we're sort of improving the bed for the future when we sort of actually get round to our seed sowing and planting out. But also, as I say, that sort of that passive element as well is hugely important. And sometimes just sort of that connection with nature, or just sort of looking around and seeing what's going on in the garden, seeing what flowers are appearing when, how sort of bees are responding to those things as well, mean that we don't always have to focus on that sort of active side of things, but it's a case of sort of finding tasks or plants that you feel particularly connected to, that you particularly want to have in your garden space or in your indoor space, but sort of things that sort of would encourage you and sort of draw you into those activities as well.
Definitely. I think it has like a real sort of profound effect on like your mental, your emotional well-being as well. Like, as you say, being outside and like not only just like achieving things, but like, when you grow your own things, there isn't a sense of achievement, of course. But I think just being outside is a really positive thing that I think people could do a little bit more. Well, some people, of course, some people are out there all
Yes,
the time. I'm sure
I
you
think
sure you don't need to be told to go outside more, but
I think it's one of those things, so certainly during lockdown, we saw, didn't we? Suddenly there was this huge sense, almost nationally of like, or internationally, sort of like being outside is good. People suddenly realized that sort of it was healthy to go for walks, to connect with outdoor spaces. And suddenly, sort of that became a priority. And we sort of saw a lot more interest in the Thrive projects during that time as well.
excellent. Well, that's wonderful to hear. That's wonderful to hear. So I suppose we've sort of got covered that one now, but let's kind of talk about what can people do, like say if they have arthritis, it's going to be quite a strain on their body to do certain gardening tasks. So, I mean, how can people reduce the strain that they may experience when gardening?
I think we can perhaps think about, the spaces that people are working in, for instance. And so maybe, having an outdoor space where they do gardening, we might perhaps incorporate sort of raised beds or planters. So places where they can sit and work at, or sort of a table for sitting at to do potting on, seed sowing tasks such as that. We might, and it's changing to say as someone who very much enjoys their lawn space and enjoys that sense of control and achievement that sort of keeping that lawn mown provides me. But so we might have to sort of make those spaces smaller. But at the same time as that, we can also maybe start to consider adaptations or ways that we can think about, how we can still carrying on doing these tasks. And so maybe for a lawn space, we might just use a strimmer, or we can think about sort of upcoming technology and the fact that there are now sort of electronic mowers, which apparently are very good at sort of tackling lawns. So that sort of takes that task off your hands if pushing a mower across a garden proves too hard. I think, on that sort of subject of raised beds as well, we can maybe not have fully raised beds, but actually just beds raised for sort of half a foot or so, and then
Mm.
use long handled tools to make sure you can get sort of access to different parts of the bed as well from a seated position.
So, what type of tools and gadgets or aids like are available for this? Because obviously, like you mentioned, like raised beds, and I know a lot of people will have trouble, kneeling down or bending over or anything like that. Is there what's available for people to use to try to help that so they can still keep gardening?
So I think when we think about sort of kneeling down and those sort of activities that could cause people issues, we can perhaps think about handled kneelers. So you can get sort of kneelers with handles at the side. So you can either sort of sit on them as a chair, or you can sort of place them as a kneeler and then use the handles to pull yourself up. We might think about perhaps in the wetter weather we've got, maybe just having sort of some good waterproof trousers to prevent your knees getting wet and things seizing up that way. Or maybe just, ideally a good pair of elasticated gloves to make sure that sort of your hands are warm as well. But then also, lots of things like ergonomic tools might be a particularly good idea when sort of digging for planting out. So again, tools that sort of help you not have to use your wrist and hand movements so much, but rather sort of use the strength of your upper arm. These can also come with arm supports as well to help you with that sort of grip and holding that tool at the same time. So there are also, yeah, a multitude of tasks, and the great thing about gardening is that it's hugely adaptable as well. So if we think about maybe seed sowing, if we're going to sow in drills, maybe one idea might be at a tabletop, getting some toilet paper, putting your carrot seeds in that, and then gluing that closed. So you've got sort of effectively a seed tape that you can place in a drill in the garden, or maybe just using sort of tubing from wrapping paper. Good time around Christmas to think about that, where you can sort of sit at the side and just place your bean seeds through the tubing and drop them into the drill as you go.
That's a great idea. I love that
Yes.
one.
I should mention as well that we do have a Get Gardening website, which will have lots of information, and there is a sort of specific article on there about gardening with arthritis.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, check the links here. We'll make sure we include that one in like all the show notes for that for sure. I was going to ask, like, where can people get these types of gadgets though?
We'll generally provide links to them, and there are sort of some gadgets which we sort of can point people towards. So, for instance, I don't know if you've heard of wolf garden tools.
I
But
haven't.
they
No.
do sort of adaptable tools, which you get a range of different length handles with different heads that you can sort of interchange on them. So they're very good for if you want to have a trowel with a longer handle. They're all quite durable, which is really good. And they come with different types of handles on them as well, including one that does have a sort of seed sowing tool for doing seeds in drills. It does sound like I'm particularly pushing seed sowing in drills, doesn't it, Mark?
Hmm.
But yeah, they are very useful. I think what I would recommend as well is just going to visit a garden centre, look around, see what they've got, and sort of see and try things out yourself. You know, as I said, the wolf garden tools, you do have to push a button to take the heads off them, and for some people that might prove to be a bit of a strain. So sort of going to garden centres, seeing what's available. You can get sort of planting troughs as well, so you can place them in your garden space, so you can grow vegetables. And these things are reasonably quite deep, and they're sort of well planned out now as well. So they are sort of well designed tools to help people with gardening.
Definitely. And also, I always love a trip to a garden centre. Garden
Yes,
centres are wonderful places.
definitely is. Yeah, over the winter and summer, just maybe just going to the cafe as well on the way out.
Oh, 100%. The one near me has great cafe. You get like sourdough pizzas and all that sort of stuff as well there. I remember when I was younger, the idea of me going to a garden centre was like, absolutely not. That's not cool. I'm not doing that. I can't wait to go to garden centres now. If I drive past, I go, oh, that looks great. I'll stop off and always
Yeah,
make sure I go in. I always end up coming out with something as well.
I do like the fact that garden centres generally they'll be focused on Christmas, probably about October.
Yeah, they really are, aren't they? Maybe a tiny Halloween section just as well, just a little
Yes.
bit. Well, another like kind of follow on from the tools is about digging. So, are there any ways to adapt to that one? Because that one obviously going to be with arthritis, especially. That's going to be a much more of a physical strain. But even, I mean, it uses so much of your body digging in general that like wherever it is, you might actually have some sort of difficulties with that. So, what about digging? Could people do?
I think, yeah, digging's certainly one that might cause some issue, mightn't it?
Mm.
So, for instance, if you're digging over a bed, what we could maybe consider is not digging at all. And we see, lots of sort of movement towards sort of no digging approaches. So there's the Charles Dowding website, which sort of talks about a no dig approach. And that essentially means just sort of putting organic matter on the top of your bed every year and just leaving nature to do its own things. That encourages worms to come up. It encourages that aeration naturally in that space. It also means less weeding over time. So hopefully you're sort of suppressing weeds that way. You can also put card over the bed as well over winter to prevent weeds coming up then as well. If we do want to dig, and certainly I'm somebody who does enjoy that task as well, we can think about maybe using back-saving tool grips, which are essentially sort of handles you can place midway on your fork to help you dig that way. Or you can also get rotivating machines, which sort of are not necessarily mechanical, but sort of you just run them over the bed and they sort of help turn over the soil as well. If sort of that sense of being involved in the sort of preparing of the bed is particularly important to you, have a look around and see what tools you can find that way as well.
Excellent.
I was going to say as well, sorry, another good sort of thing that you can sort of have if bending down is an issue is you might think about having leaning posts built into your beds as well. So rather than sort of carrying a needle around, you can have just posts sort of waist height. So when you're doing your gardening, you can reach out and just put your hand on a post and pull yourself up that way. It's sort of quite a supple way of sort of hopefully providing someone a way of sort of getting up from a kneeling position.
I think another thing that's probably important to mention in all this as well is like kind of the pacing aspect of it all as well, because like, as you mentioned, like having like leaning posts to be able to like take a load off or something.
Yes.
I think it's important because we talk about this a lot in the charity about like the need for planning and pacing and making sure that you're not overdoing it, and the fact that you can do these things in little segments and just do like a little bit of it here, a little bit of it there. I know one example I always give, like when I do presentations, is kind of like changing your mindset of how you do things. Like we all have this idea, like if you mow the lawn, you have to mow it all in one go and it must be done today, regardless of the size of your lawn.
Yeah.
Because people, I don't know why, it's something like that type of thinking is ingrained in all of us, I think. Whereas just doing a little bit, do a quarter of the lawn. That's fine. Just do a little bit, do the rest tomorrow or do it
Yeah.
another day. I feel it doesn't always have to be done in one go as well, as important to mention.
No, I think that's hugely important. I think sometimes, in my own garden at home, I've got sort of the area at the back, which I frankly never really get to, and it's become overgrown with ivy. It's got brambles, but it is great for watching bees coming and sort of
Mm.
enjoying the space, and sometimes just this sort of knowledge that nature can look after itself. And sort of actually, sometimes if we leave things to become overgrown, it doesn't make that much of a difference at the end of the day. A lawn space that isn't mown still is a great place to encourage biodiversity and things like that. And we don't have to sort of constantly think about, all the work we need to do. If I'm being quite honest, sometimes I'm a bit of a fair weather gardener myself. And maybe as it sort of gets colder, I become less inclined to go outside, but I can still look out at the garden. I can still see birds coming and sort of feeding off the seed heads, see squirrels sort of digging in the bulbs I just planted and maybe sort of shoo them off a little bit. But it still gives me a sense of, sort of pride and satisfaction. And then I know that sort of come the spring when things warm up, then I'll be happier going outside and taking on those tasks.
I did actually want to talk to you about the weather, really, because other than aside from it just being like the most British thing you can do, but
Yes.
when it comes to arthritis, the weather can have a real tangible effect on people. Like it works differently for different people. Like I know that some people love the winter, and some people absolutely hate it because it makes their joints ache. So like, what can people sort of like do during the different seasons? So let's do all four of them.
Okay.
And and let's go through that. So let's start with winter. What can people do to like kind of have it make their arthritis a little less worse while they're gardening in the winter?
So perhaps we might just recommend sort of light exercise in the garden, or maybe just taking a cup of tea out with a blanket, sort of sitting and enjoying the space, or maybe just taking a camera phone and taking photos to see what's changed over the course of a week or a month. It might be also that winter's a good time for sort of preparing, isn't it? We can start to think about sort of the next year, which we might clean or sharpen tools or something like that, get things ready and neat for the upcoming spring. We also, during winter, which I quite enjoy over Christmas, there's a tendency we have to sort of bring outdoor plants indoors.
Mm.
So maybe we can sort of go out and start gathering some holly with the berries. We might get some ivy. We could maybe sort of think about some floral foam, so we can make little sort of structures or make sort of little present. What's the word I'm looking for, Mark?
Present decorations.
Yeah, some indoor decorations using even sort of seed heads and things that we find that we can sort of have around the house. So yeah, it's a time for like sort of going out and just appreciating the green that we have. Maybe sort of planting some things that flower in winter, such as vinca or hellebores as well. So we get that sort of burst coming into spring as well.
Excellent. Okay, let's go to spring then. What can people do in the spring then? Especially, I'd like to also bear in mind, like the physical challenges they might have during these as well. Spring's going to start to make it a bit easier. It's starting to get a bit warmer, so some people
Yeah.
find their mobility's a bit better for it.
So we have hopefully sort of seen winter as maybe being a more dormant period. Spring is perhaps when we start to seed sow, and again we can think about adapting that task, can't we? So it could be that maybe if we're doing very small seeds, we have a toothpick that we can sort of wet one end of, dip into the seeds, and then place in the seed trays and work that way. Or just thinking about what we want to grow. So sunflowers maybe would be a seed that allows someone a better purchase when sowing them. We also want to make sure that we are sort of preparing the beds, and so sort of mulching beds, and again sort of maybe having some compost, or we can also use koi compost, which is lighter, or just doing small trips to help mulch the beds as we do that. So it's that time sort of seed sowing, potting on, and again, sort of we've got a technique for potting on which hopefully makes it easier. Or if we're planting out, maybe just using a bulb planter to sort of make those holes in the ground.
Excellent. On to summer now then.
Yes. So summer, that's watering, isn't it?
Mm.
Agreed?
Yeah.
So a bit of mowing, bit of watering, maybe some cutting back. If we are going to be doing sort of pruning roses, using loppers that help you have those using both arms at the same time. You can also purchase cut and hold secateurs, so you can cut the dead heads instead of having to sort of pick them off the ground. They help you sort of keep hold of the flower head, and then you can put them in a bin from there, which hopefully saves some time there. Watering, perhaps if you've got lots of plants, keep them all in one place, maybe keep them near the water source. A bit of advice we got on the Get Gardening website from somebody with arthritis was just half filling a watering can. And sometimes these sort of bits of advice can seem quite obvious, but there's a really good idea, isn't it?
The simplest ones are often like the ones that no one thinks of, really. To be honest, I don't think I'd even thought of that, and I work for an arthritis charity.
It'll be one of those things that someone's like, of course, it's half filled watering can, is it? That's what's going to do it. And you can maybe make sure you're sort of getting the water more directly to your plants by, another idea is sort of taking an old pot, putting it, sinking it into the ground near the roots of the plant you're watering, so that water gets more directly to the roots. And even that way, you don't really need to think about a rose as well. So again, sort of lots of ideas that can hopefully make these tasks easier as you go. But also in the summer, have people around.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, autumn. A little bit. I think this is probably the more difficult one, I'd imagine.
Autumn, when it is getting colder, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know about you, but autumn's still my favourite season.
I love it myself, yeah.
I really love that sort of that low-lying sun, the colours you get from the trees. I like seeing the leaves they fall, and sort of the seed heads and stuff like that always fascinate with their sort of structure. But certainly, I think, if we are going to do raking, you can get some nice light handled rakes. You can use sort of foam grips that you can place on that hopefully they help with grip. You can also get long handled grabbers and things to help pick up leaves. But it is, as I say, another time for just appreciating what's going on around you. I think also I'd recommend just with autumn and going outside as the weather gets colder, as you probably all well know, just make sure you do warm-ups. Do a little bit of sort of a stretch before you go outside, because certainly going from that hot indoor environment to the outside means you're probably a bit more likely to pull a muscle, and we don't want that.
That was something I was actually going to ask you about, actually. Like the idea of like, no, it's all good. No. Anything you do physically is essentially a type of exercise, like exercise and activity. So like what type of warm-ups would you recommend for that? Because, as you say, you don't want to be pulling a muscle or sort of doing yourself an injury.
No, I think if someone has experience of doing yoga, but also just some light stretches, sort of try and touch the toes a little bit, reach up to the sky a little bit, just do some gentle movement from side to side with your elbows up a little. So just making sure that sort of you have stretched and limbered up a little bit before you go outside. So yeah, there's less chance of getting an injury that way.
Yeah, I think it's the thing people forget very often is to warm up a bit before, things like gardening, because it seems so like innocuous and it's not formal exercise. Like people, if someone went to a gym or an exercise class, you'd always do a warm up, and that's the natural thing you do. But you tend to forget to do it in other areas of life.
Yeah.
I think whenever you sort of do anything physical, especially if it's cold, you should warm your body up a little bit, because the last thing you want to do is end up, pulling a hamstring or something like that, or like throwing your back out, and then you're unable to do anything for ages.
When we're running sessions here at Thrives, some of the practitioners with the client gardeners will do those warm-ups, and it's part of that sort of meeting up with people, discussing people's days, but also just that sort of beginning of the day, and becomes that part of that routine. So working into routine can be a really good idea.
What if people like find that moving around for too long is an issue? I mean, we probably should have talked about this when we were talking about pacing, but imagine, like, say someone can only cover a very short distance due to their limited mobility. How could they still sort of manage gardening then, do you think?
Yeah, I think this idea of sort of hopefully having the plants or the sort of tasks that you're most interested in, bringing them closer to you. So if you've got sort of a back door, having some planters that you can easily reach near there is one idea. Also, if you the idea of sort of doing one task, not doing it for too long, so switching things up. I personally am a gardener who sort of will get distracted very easily, do like sort of maybe 5 minutes of weeding, then move off and sort of do a bit of light pruning, then do some watering. So just allowing yourself to take that time away from a task if it's becoming onerous as well.
Do you think is there like any benefit to like adapting the garden itself for this as well? To like, almost like having it redone or redoing it yourself?
I think, yeah, definitely sort of said, sort of minimizing spaces and thinking about the maintenance is important as well. So if there are, sort of say, large lawn spaces that you're struggling to maintain, then thinking about what you can have instead of that. If bending down really is an issue, then it's those, as I said, raised beds and planters and things like that. But sort of making sure also that you have things in the garden that interest you and that draw you outside. And so, you have space for sunflowers or for plants that attract wildlife or whatever it is that sort of makes you connect with the space itself.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when we moved into like the house I'm currently in, we like got some raised beds in there, and the first thing we wanted to do was get as many plants as possible that can attract bees. Because
Yes.
I just love seeing bees in the garden, and so
Yeah.
yeah, just that's the. It's nice to have like a priority thing for as well. Like, what do you want your garden to do, and well, it's kind of like, what do you want to get out of it? And I think that was the number one thing both me and my wife wanted was we want as many bees in that garden as possible.
Nice. And I think, yeah, some people be food growing, won't it? I think, like you, Mark, I've sort of got ivy at the bottom of the garden, as I said, and they seem to love the flowers they provide come late autumn. When I see dandelions, my thought is, oh, that's great. That's an early pollinator that bees will be naturally drawn to. And so, I hugely sort of appreciate having those plants in the space as well.
Great. And so over to like kind of one of my last questions now, actually.
Yes.
We kind of sort of touched around it a little bit, but let's just sort of go for it directly as yeah, can gardening make your arthritis worse?
I would certainly hope not. I think, at Thrive, we try and work in a person centered approach, and that's sort of understanding that the individual is the expert in their disability. And so, if someone is to go out and sort of take on very heavy work or sort of work at times where it might aggravate their condition, that's not what we would recommend at all. But what I want to see is perhaps, sort of people appreciating outdoor spaces, having plants around that they feel some connection to. And even if sort of does mean perhaps having indoor plants like mother-in-law's tongue or maybe just herbs in the kitchen that they can sort of harvest when they are sort of cooking, or mint that they can propagate by just taking cuttings, and sort of just appreciating the wonderment of how mint continues to grow from just a tiny cutting that you can take placed in a glass of water. So these sorts of things, this sort of sense of wonder that green spaces and plants can provide, would still hopefully be available to everyone and not cause too much of an adverse effect.
Definitely. And I also, again, as we've already mentioned about like the exercise factor and the fact that if you're doing something that will strengthen your muscles and get yourself moving, it will actually be beneficial for you as long as you are doing, as you say, making sure you're pacing yourself correctly, not doing too heavy a task that perhaps maybe you kind of know you shouldn't be doing, or at least breaking it into small chunks as well. Because
Yes. Regular and consistent exercise would be the way to go. And I think, gardening hopefully can, as you said, sort of provide a range of different levels of activity that you can engage in.
for sure. Right. So, last question for you now, then. What advice would you give to someone with arthritis, or even without arthritis, I suppose, as well, if they were interested in starting gardening?
It's a good question, isn't it? I think it's a case of maybe sort of trying to work out their level of confidence. Do they have a space that they want to develop? Or do they perhaps want to sort of link in with a community group so they can meet other people? Again, that social side of things is really important. I think if you go on the RHS website or Incredible Edibles website, or even there's men's sheds, they can provide sort of a list of different projects in your local area. And so thinking about, joining allotment and such like that, or just, as I said, going to the garden centre, looking through the seed packets, deciding which ones particularly take your fancy. So for somebody, it might just be that sort of first experience of growing cress at home and seeing how they develop from that. For other people, it might be sort of getting some roses and planting them out. But really sort of just finding out what interests you, what draws you to the activities or the certain plants, and then going from there.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So, right, could you tell us a little bit more about how people can get involved with Thrive then?
Certainly. So you can go to our website at www.thrive.org.uk. You can also get in touch with us through our info email inbox at info@thrive.org.uk, or I'm in the training team. So again, if you need any sort of questions for me, just mention that and I'm sure that'll get through to me somehow.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll include links to that in the episode description as well. And also, we have our own gardening page as well on our Arthritis Action website, which is www.arthritisaction.org.uk. And if you have any questions or want any more information, please just let me know. And you can do that at podcast@arthritisaction.org.uk. And if you haven't already, please do like, subscribe, or follow the podcast wherever you get them to make sure that you don't miss any new episodes. So, Mark, thank you so much. That's been really interesting. I've really enjoyed that.
Brilliant. It's great to meet you, Mark. Thank you very much.
You too. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.